Right, looking at the title of this video, you can probably guess that I'm about to enter my first game jam. So, preparations. I planned to make a game during my holiday. I went to Sweden and I thought I had time enough in the car to practice. But it turned out I really needed a vacation because nothing seemed to work. I tried working with tile maps, but I just couldn't get it right. So I decided I needed to close my laptop and just enjoy nature for a bit. Then, back from vacation, I realized I also needed a plan. The game jam is in 1.5 weeks and I could use some focus points. Since the game jam is Kenny's game jam, you're only allowed to use the sprites from that website. So it would be helpful to get used to working with sprite sheets. Then I thought of some other game mechanics that could come in handy. So I created a list of minimum things I wanted to learn and gave myself 2 days to learn them. Day 1. Looking at the list, I thought a platformer game would work here. So I downloaded a set of platformer sprites from Kenny's website. The footage is a bit weird because OBS was recording with HDR for some reason, but I changed it and after some fiddling around with tile maps, I created a nice looking scene. The key here is to take a good look at the resolution of the individual sprite. That's where it went wrong the first time. Then, I set up the basics for the character with Unity's input system. Nothing new here, but good to practice again. I created the player and added an empty game object called attack to use for shooting later. And then my brain went like, no, he has to look to the right by default, so I changed that as well. And here you see me adding the camera to the player to let it follow the player, but I'll eventually change that back. And because I don't like to see the blue, I went crazy with the tile maps. And in the end you will see this was an unnecessary waste of time. I implemented the code to move and jump and tried it out. When you look close you see some tearing. I'll show it again in slow motion. No idea what's going on here, but the solution was to create a sprite atlas and add the sprite sheets to that atlas. I also added material to the player and platformer with no friction, so the player doesn't get stuck on the sides. And there we go, our player can move and jump now and it actually looks pretty decent. Time to add in an enemy in this peaceful world. For the first enemy, I basically used the code from the evil barrels of a game I made earlier. If you like, you can watch a video about that on my channel. So, with the enemy done, it was time to be able to shoot it. For shooting, I figured it would be great to practice with the particle system. I created an attack bubble because for some reason I thought the player was some kind of Aquaman, and then I added some particles. Quick note here, messing around with the particle system can take up a lot of time, so in a game jam probably something to fine-tune later. I then implemented the code for shooting, which was easier than I thought. I needed to make sure the player had an attack rate, and at the moment space is pressed, a new attack bubble is created with a horizontal velocity. When the bullet hits an enemy, both objects will be destroyed, and if the bullet doesn't hit anything in a certain amount of time, it will be destroyed as well. The last thing I did that day was creating the animations for the player. It took me a little longer than expected. I had worked with animations in Godot, but in Unity it works a bit different. But when I realized I needed to see it as a sort of state machine, I got it figured out. And see here our little animation. So if we look at the list, I managed to do 4 out of 8 things, which is quite a progress in my opinion. I used sprite sheets, implemented shooting, created an animation and got creative with particles. The rest of the day I took some time to look at the videos of my vacation and relive some moments again. Day 2. It's probably a good idea to set up a to-do board. Normally you should do that at the beginning, but hey, better late than never. It's not just for the things I really need to do, but also if things pop up. I keep coming up with cool things and then forget them because I don't write them down, so hopefully this will help. I started the day off with a new enemy. I created him and gave him an animation to see if I could remember what I did yesterday. Then I implemented a code to give him some sort of AI. Well, not actually AI, but it is programmed to chase the player when it comes to range. In Unity, you can use vector2.distance, which calculates the distance between two objects, and with that you can make it chase the player when the distance is less than, well, whatever number you want. Here you see the enemy chasing the player, and as a player you can even try to outrun the enemy. I found out though that the enemies sometimes would spawn behind the player, so I added a sorting layer to make sure that all enemies are always in front of the player. And I created a coroutine to add a delay before the scene reloads when the player dies. This makes it a bit more comfortable to watch. Alright, and with the AI enemy and the delay done, we're now ready to continue with some kind of score, timer-ish, and also with that the end screen. But I obviously had to try the game out first with some more enemies. And I must say, with the enemies chasing me, it was actually pretty hard to defeat all enemies, so I kinda had to up the chase distance a bit. To give the game somewhat of a goal, I implemented a timer. Of course, in regular game design you should always think about that first, but the main focus points for me here these 2 days were learning how to actually make things work. At first, the timer showed way too many numbers and I figured that minutes wasn't really necessary, so I changed the code to only show seconds with 2 numbers behind the comma. The timer stops when all enemies are gone and that's where the game ends. But a game also needs to start, so I created the start menu, and this actually took me a very long time because it's really not my thing. I just don't like building these screens. I think it reminds me too much of the early HTML times. Don't know why, because it's a lot easier now, but that's just how it feels. Anyway, I created it and added some tutorial text as well, and later on I realized I also implemented code for the controller and the buttons can't be pressed with the controller, but I deal with that later. Because at this point I got annoyed with the transition between the menu scene and the game scene, and to save some time I just removed the camera from the player so the menu scene and the game scene would look the same. And that's why all the tile work was for nothing. I then added some audio, so headphone users, I'm sorry. Yeah, like I said, I'm sorry, but I kinda like the tune as well, so it stays. I then created an end screen, implemented some new inputs to make it work with the controller, and then did a bit of fine-tuning here and there to complete the game. And here we go. Great. So I think I can mark the other 4 things that we're left to do. So basically achieve my goal and now have some knowledge about how to implement certain things in Unity. But what else have I learned during these 2 days? Well, first off, focus. I am someone who gets distracted very easy. And not only because my phone goes off, but also just staring blankly out of the window is something I tend to do a lot. So the Pomodoro technique would come in handy here, I think. Another thing is that I tend to focus on small things and spend way too long working on minor issues. So work with some kind of planner like Trello or Milanote would be wise. Then it's also good to take a break, go out for a walk, clear your mind, and oh yeah, don't forget to eat. Development-wise, I think I know some things now, and the rest of the week I want to read some extra stuff about game design just for inspiration. I have a nice book called Level Up, and has been laying around for too long, so gonna read through that, and then I think I'm good. Anyway, I hope you find this video somewhat useful or inspirational or whatever. If you have any tips, leave them in the comments, and I'll see you next time.